So I just finished season 2 of Narcos, and I actually picked up some pretty good lessons from our old friend Pablo Escobar. Here's what I learned.
Pablo is never more dangerous than when you almost have him.
Pablo Escobar se le respeta. Los voy a matar a todos. Somos el cartel de Medellín, hijueputa.
All right, so check it out. If you guys aren't watching Narcos, you need to go do that right now. It's on Netflix. It's a Netflix original, and they have 2 seasons now. They just released the 2nd season of this show. And if you're not following along, you're not familiar, which it'd be weird to not be familiar with this guy. His name is Pablo Escobar, and he's one of the most notorious drug lords in the world. Now, before we start kind of like digging into the lessons, let me just be clear. Like, I'm not endorsing what this guy has done. I'm not endorsing his life or what he did with his, his time on Earth. I don't think it's a good thing. I think he's super fucking evil and a horrible person. That being said, though, there are a lot of things that you can look at and understand why they worked for him, right? You can understand why he was able to become as rich and, infamous as he eventually became. To get a little bit clearer on, what he accomplished, if you can call it an accomplishment, on what he was able to do, at the height of at the peak of his empire, he was bringing in like over $240 million a week. So he's bringing in $250 million a week. He was essentially one of the richest men in the world, like the 6th or 7th richest man in the world. You couldn't even be listed on Forbes because obviously that's all dirty money. But he amassed a crazy notorious legacy in Colombia, pretty much all of South America, and the world over, because he was completely ruthless and he dominated in the 80s and 90s. And there are a couple interesting things that you can pick up from his personality and his rise to fame if you're really paying attention. So the first thing is the idea of having, and I'm using, again, my quotation fingers here because I'm not endorsing him, but 1,000 true fans, okay? He had a lot of loyal support, but if you look at how many people were supporting him versus the people that he was against, he actually had a very small amount of people at his side on his team. Throughout his reign of drug and narco terror in the 80s and 90s, he essentially had a militia that would do his dirty work for him. So effective to the point that he at one point ransacked the Colombian Supreme Court, and it was crazy. He took helicopters and tanks and he broke into the Supreme Court in order to overturn a ruling that was against his favor, because he was able to employ essentially small armies to do his bidding. And compared to the Colombian national government, compared to the United States Army, compared to the armies of the world, he wasn't that big. But he had so many loyal followers because of the things he'd done, because of the acts of service he'd done for the community, that he had a lot of loyal people that wanted to help him out. For instance, one thing he would do is he would take some of his drug money and he would reinvest it into the community by building like soccer stadiums, and he would do just like the Al Capone type thing. He would give out turkeys at Christmas. He built an entire barrio, which is essentially a neighborhood where families could grow up, and he did all these other things. He would make sure he was seen amongst the people. He just handing out money, and he did all this to gather his 1,000 true fans. I'm sure it was more than 1,000 people, but it was a small amount of people who really supported him. And up until the very end, they pretty much let him get away with literal murder. And when he needed them, they would kill for him. So it shows you the power of having some people who are really down for the cause sticking by your side. In terms of business and entrepreneurship, this is something that we can establish, within our own, small niches by just giving out great content and doing great work, and, establishing relationships with, our 1,000 true fans. And we don't have to do it in a nefarious, weird way like Pablo. But the idea is people are powerful, and you don't need a lot of people to advance your cause, advance your ideas, or grow into something much larger than you were before. It's actually pretty scary how powerful even a small but very dedicated group of people can be to achieving a goal. And this goes hand in hand with another lesson that I learned kind of watching the show and really trying to analyze this character that I was witnessing. Now remember, Pablo is a real character. He's a real person, or he was a real person. And if you look at like, popular television shows, especially Breaking Bad, things like that nowadays, you can see how much of these fictional characters are modeled after a real life person like Pablo. Part of that is because he had a complete lack of self-awareness when it came to his own hypocrisy versus, the needs and wants of other people who he was doing a lot of harm to. As he progressed in his journey and as he progressed with his, his initiatives, he had to get things done. And what that meant was that he had to, kill more people to advance his cause. He had to, take over more things and be more aggressive. And over time, everyone started turning against him, including, some of his allies, to the point where at the very end of his life, he pretty much didn't have anybody who was on his team anymore. And so he was kind of like tearing down those bridges that he'd built with 1,000 true fans. Now, the interesting part about this is as he was slowly losing money and power and, prestige in South America and especially in the drug industry, he had this idea that the world was against him because they were all evil and he was the righteous one. And it's so funny because obviously he's doing all these killings. He's, trying to blow up the presidential palace and he's assassinating people and he's doing all these things that obviously would piss off everyone else. And yet he feels that he's the one who's being wronged. And as you're watching this and as you're thinking about, the thought process that must go into to being a person like this, you start to realize that we're all kind of like this, aren't we? We all see the world from our own perspective. And so the things that happen to us, a lot of times, if we don't have a lot of self-awareness, they're mistreatments of us. They are unfair. They're without cause, and we start to feel like we're victims. We start to feel like the world is out to get us, and that surely we don't deserve this type of horrible treatment we're getting. And that's how Pablo felt. Pablo felt that he wasn't being treated fairly. He felt that he was just trying to live a peaceful life, and everyone kept getting in his way. If they would just let him have his drugs and commit his crimes, no one else need get hurt. The logic that goes into this just shows, well, one, the logic of a true psychopath, but also the idea that we all have our own personal code, our own view of the world. And if you can understand that as a marketer, as an entrepreneur, you realize that everyone has their own agenda. Now, obviously, we're talking about someone who's like an evil historical figure here, but everyone still has an idea of what they want, an idea of an intended outcome that they're looking to get. And at the end of the day, even if we try to collaborate and cooperate, we all still have the bottom line, which usually is our own interest in mind. So if you can think about what your customers, what your customers' primary interests are, usually their own self-interests. If you can think about what those ideas are, the things that they really want, you don't have to wonder what you can say to communicate to them. You don't have to wonder what's going to catch their attention. You have to think about the fact that from their perspective, they want everything to work out in their favor. And if you can present them with ideas, information, products, services that will help them to further their goals, that's what's going to get their attention and ultimately get them to open up the checkbook, right? Because we all have our own best interests in mind, regardless, in many cases, of what's happening outside of us. Even when the evidence itself doesn't support the idea that we're right, we still have our own best interests in mind. So if you can remember that, you can market to anybody. So I hope you don't go off and do anything like Pablo, but it is useful to think about how someone who's so obsessed with a goal operates and how you can use some of those ideas and those mentalities to do some positive things with your own life. All right, I hope you like this, and if you like Narcos, well, I'm not going to show any more of the Narcos clips, but please subscribe to my channel. Leave a comment below if you're watching Narcos or if you have anything you want to add to the conversation. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.